Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Frontline Network Annual Conference. We'll just wait for everyone to join. Hope everybody has had an okay morning, whether affected by heat or in London we had extreme thunderstorms, so you might have had them wherever you were as well. Okay, I'm Duncan, Schrubsole, Chief Exec of St Martin in the Fields charity. Delighted to have you all join us today. We've got people from right across the UK, from a whole range of organisations, backgrounds, but all people right on the front line of tackling homelessness. And it's brilliant to have you all with us. So in terms of how today works, you might have been to these before, or this might be your first time. You can join for one session or the whole day. All sessions are being recorded as webinars, so we definitely want you here today. But if there's a parallel session you weren't able to get to, or you want to go back and look at something in more detail, or share the recordings afterwards, and you can catch up with them then. We want this to be interactive, so please get involved in the sessions using the chat but for reflections. If you want to ask a specific question of a speaker, please use the Q&A function. Try and keep those separate, because if you put a question in the chat, might get lost. And if you put lots of chat in the Q&A, you won't find the questions. So chat for reflections, Q&A if you want to ask a question. You can join the conversation online by whichever social networks that you use. Addresses are there. Please use the hashtag Frontline Network. Great to see people joining us from the chat already. So just to kind of share what we're going to cover today. So I'm going to do a little bit of background from St Martin in the Fields charity, what work we've been doing supporting frontline workers, but also reflecting on the current political and social climate. With that, it's going to go straight into a discussion. We've got some great speakers from around the UK who are going to reflect on some of those issues around the climate and what it means for frontline workers and you and your work. Then got a short break because we are big believers in well-being here at St Martin in the Fields charity. So chance to go off, grab a cup of tea, hopefully not get dragged into doing 19 bits of casework, but a chance to just have a break. And then we'll go into 3 sessions. Then we've got a lunchtime break. We jumped onto the afternoon here. We've got a lunchtime break. And then we're going to have a really important session to talk about moral injury, which we know is an issue that's come up for many people. So please go and come to that session, have a discussion. And then another break. And then we've got 3 really great sessions in the afternoon. You've hopefully seen that agenda before and you've hopefully signed up for stuff. Please come to as many sessions as you can. But as I said, if you can't, afterwards you can catch up with the recordings. So we are going to kick off with some interactivity alongside what's on the chat and the Q&A. So if you can go onto your phone and go to menti.com and just enter this code 83782855. So it's menti.com 83782855. Okay, menti.com 83782855. Okay, so the first question, where are you in the UK? Look at this great place here. So if you can, so you might be putting this in the chat, but if you can put it in Menti as well, then it means it can populate this map. I'm going to see if we can cover Land's End to John O'Groats and Belfast to Bangor. There you go. Or we should go, Ipswich to Derry or something like that to go east west. Oh, people asking for the Menti code. The Menti code is uh, 8378 2855. So it's menti.com 8378 2855. A good spread. Great to see. I think we've just crossed the border into Scotland, definitely in Northern Ireland, in Wales, southwest, east of England. Should have been better at my geography GCSE. I'll be able to tell you where everything was. Okay, great. Anyway, this is great to see. One of the key things is that we know that people face specific experiences in their town or their city or their region or their nation, but actually there's also a whole commonality of the importance of the role of being a frontline worker and the successes you have, but also the challenges you face. And one of the things we aim to do at St Martin's is to promote that kind of cross learning across the UK, across the nations and regions, so that everybody can learn from each other. So, next slide, please. Okay, on the same Menti code, what are your hopes for the day? So if you could enter that, please, that would be great. Okay. Sorry, when some of you point out there's some black spots on the screen, we're just going to temporarily stop sharing and then reshare the screen in order to clear those. Okay. Big shout outs for learning. Yes, there's a black square still there. Don't worry, nothing's going to happen in that black square. Okay, next question. Next slide, please. What do you like most about your role? We always want to start positive. What do you like most about your role on being a frontline worker, great, making a difference, people, helping people, working with people, supporting people, human interaction. Basically, it's all about the people. Okay. And next slide, please. Okay, so thank you very much for all of those interactions. Really good that that's what people value about their role and what people want to get out for today. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an update about our work, then on the context, and then we're going to open up for discussion. So for those, some of you may know St Martin Fields charity well. For those of you who don't, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what we've been doing, in particular in the context of supporting frontline workers. So next slide. Okay, so the work we do is in primarily three areas, all around our mission, which is that our belief that everyone should have a safe place to call home and the support they need to keep it. And first of all, we help individuals directly into new accommodation through the provision of grants and funding to cover the costs of moving into accommodation, to help make accommodation sustainable and people feel like it's a home. Second, and that's our focus today, which is supporting frontline workers, championing your role, speaking up for the issues that affect you, but really highlighting that if you ask someone who's been homeless, what made the difference? They'll say it was you, the frontline worker who stood by and believed in them. Yes, services matter, but it's frontline workers who are key. And the third thing we do is seek to develop and test and explore some new solutions to homelessness and advocate for them and spread them by influencing policy and practice. And so through all of our work, we provide funding, we encourage learning between the projects that we fund, and we seek to take that learning to influence others. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of our support for frontline workers, we do this primarily under the brand of the Frontline Network, which is about things we do ourselves and things we do working through partners. So we seek to support workers from across the homelessness sector, so voluntary, statutory, housing association, public sectors. We think everybody has a role to play, whether you're a nurse, a probation worker, in a housing association, on tenancy support, in a local authority, or in a voluntary homelessness organisation. So we seek to provide funding, crucially a community. It can be quite a lonely and isolating role sometimes being a frontline worker, and we seek to provide resources to help you in your job. Next slide. One of the things we do is national, regional, and local frontline networks. So in the other nations of the UK outside England, we work with Sirens in Scotland, Cymorth, Cymru in Wales, and we're going to hear from Katie later, Homeless Connect in Northern Ireland, and then we work with Just Life in Brighton and Hove, Street Life in Blackpool, Basis in Yorkshire, and Praxis working in London and more widely now across England, supporting migrants and those frontline workers supporting migrants. So if you don't know about a local frontline network and it's near you, please check them out. That's a chance to come together to share and network. And one of the things that we also are looking to do this year is set up more networks in England to expand that reach. Next slide. Okay, so getting the training you need to do your job is fundamentally something that the organisation employing you should do, but we also recognise, particularly for some small, more grassroots organisations, or if you're wanting to do some training that helps you develop as a team outside the core offer your organisation might provide, we want to help you. So we offer a range of courses, based on topics that you suggest through this conference and other things. We also have a training fund. You can apply for up to £500 as an individual, or a team can apply to up to £1,500. Go to the website frontlinenetwork.org.uk. Everything's there and you can apply. So please do. Where I said the triangle of work that we did, I said we provide grants to help people move into accommodation. We work through frontline workers. So you as a frontline worker, apply to us for an emergency grant and we can offer up to £650 to help with the costs of moving an individual through rent in advance, deposits, ID, moving costs, emergency accommodation. The great beauty of this is that it's money that you as an individual frontline worker can use to help a client that you're working with. So you might be the only one in that organisation, or there might be 10 of you in that organisation, but please do apply. Again, check out frontlinenetwork.org.uk. And we're really keen to support grassroots, local, informal, voluntary organisations, particularly to help give them the tools to help move people into accommodation, both to resolve homelessness or prevent it happening in the first place. And it's really important to provide practical support, but we also think it's really important to champion the vital role that you do. Too often you're undervalued, underheard, and too often ignored. So we're trying out some things. We're really keen to champion wellbeing. We've provided grants to 5 charities this year and given them the money and said, you need to work with your frontline workers to decide how they want to use the money. We have our annual Frontline Workers Survey, which captures the views and insights of frontline workers and seeks to we use that evidence, we take it to the press, we take it to politicians, we take it to policymakers, and in particular, using that insight, working with Homeless Link and others, we influenced the new homelessness strategy in England, and through a group, and then through direct meeting with officials and the homelessness minister, helped lead to them saying, look, we need to have a national workforce programme as part of that strategy. That's what the text is at the bottom. And that programme will be working over 3 years to work with the sector to develop qualifications, support, routes into employment in the sector. But we're also not afraid to speak up. So this is a bit of newscast pieces that we did about the strategy, the things that were missing, the things where more is needed, where tricky issues like pay need to be tackled. So we will always seek to, using the evidence that we gather, speak up and on behalf of and with and alongside frontline workers. And we're keen to help ensure your work can be used and shared and fed into other things. So Suzanne Fitzpatrick, we're going to hear from later. We're working with her and her colleagues at Heriot Watt to help ensure the view of frontline workers feeds into new research she's doing on homelessness prevention. So we've been helping recruit frontline workers to join focus groups. And I think there's a link in the chat. If you're interested, please register. Because we think it's vitally important. Too often we hear from people at the top, and we actually need to hear from the workers on the ground, providing the support about what's working, what's not, and what needs to change. Okay, so that's a little bit about us. And now, primarily to think about what we want to talk about today, I want to reflect a little bit on the context in which you're working and everybody is sitting in the homelessness sector. So I've characterized this as the good, the bad, and the ugly. For some reason, there's a black block over context, which is kind of scary, but that's it, the external we are in. So the good. So it's important to say there has been some good over the last year. I talked about the new homelessness strategy in England. It was much waited for. It got a bit delayed as a couple of ministers had to resign over their dodgy housing arrangements, but we have it. And in it is some good positive stuff. Really good that it seeks to look across the homelessness sector as a whole, with new commitments to reduce the use of and improve the quality of temporary accommodation, to tackle long-term rough sleeping, seeking to halve long-term rough sleeping, a greater commitment to prevention, including around key transition points. There was some new money, and I talked about the new National Workforce Programme. In England, we've also had the Renters' Rights Act and a continuing commitment to build new social housing. We had some of the changes around intentionality rules around care leavers and how supported housing is treated if for young people moving into work. So it means they don't have to face so much of the cost of supported housing when they move into work. And in Scotland and Wales, we've seen some positive things as well. The Homelessness and Social Housing Act in Wales, which Cymorth, Cymru and others have worked really hard at, is ending priority need and intentionality. Is bringing in Ask and Act, which is to put a duty on all public bodies to be thinking, okay, what is this person potentially homeless and how can we help them? Look at rapid rehousing and proactive prevention up to 6 months out. And in Scotland, the Housing Act in Scotland is bringing better protection for tenants, amongst many other things, and rent caps. So we definitely had, for many, many years, people have not been looking at the private rented sector, even though it's such a key source of challenges. But in England, Wales and Scotland, we're now having action to seek to improve the quality of it. We also know that the welfare system is crucial to causing and preventing homelessness. So we've now got the Crisis and Resilience Fund, which is resources at local level to help the individuals and organisations. And we've seen the end of the 2-child limit, which should have a real impact and benefit for families. And this time last year, we were sitting here really worried about cuts to personal independence payments, and that those haven't come in. Yes, there have been some changes to universal credit, which going to be quite challenging, but certainly the picture on welfare is potentially quite a lot better than we thought it might be this time last year. So this is the good. We should all celebrate, and much campaigning by many organisations caused all of these things to happen. Now we move to the bad. So if we think about context, so the bad. The homelessness strategy in England was good, but there's some gaps. The most obvious is local housing allowance. It's so critical when rents keep rising that if the money we give people to pay for rents is falling, then we're going to have real challenges. Other government departments, we know all their policies are big impacts on homelessness, none more so than the Home Office. And we've got Bridget from NACOM who can talk at length about the challenges that the Home Office cause. We also, in the homelessness strategy, there was a real bit of a lack of long-term ambition and long-term funding framework. Yes, halving long-term rough sleepers by the end of the Parliament is good, but why not further and faster, and what beyond that? And some questions about who really drives change, the centre or local areas. There's also a lot of uncertainty in local government. Reorganisation is kind of hanging over many local authorities, which means no one knows quite who's going to be commissioning with what money. We've had big changes, particularly in England, but also elsewhere, in political control at local council level. People are dealing with lots of no overall control, lots of reform councils, and crucially, lots of new councillors of any party who don't really know what's up, which way is up, sorry. And so then you're asking them to look at commissioning services, and they don't necessarily know their way around a council chamber yet. Supported housing regulation, there's some uncertainty over quite how that's going to come in and what impact it will have on providers. We've got a new government in Cardiff. I wrote this last week. Another new government in Westminster. Didn't quite know that it might be this quick, but that will always cause uncertainty. And in Belfast, huge challenges, but a government that looks like it's not quite up to the challenges of tackling them. We know there's massive pressure on frontline services, probation, mental health, substance misuse, and we know that the cost of living continues to be a massive challenge, and the labour market, and particularly the labour market for low entry-level jobs, is really challenging. So that's the bad. Now we come to the ugly. Despite all of our efforts, homelessness remains stubbornly high across the UK. But we've just seen rises in Northern Ireland. We know temporary accommodation keeps ticking up. In England, we know it's really, despite everyone's best efforts on the front line, it's high, rising, and not falling. Shortage of affordable, suitable, appropriate, accessible housing is a massive challenge to everybody. And then we get to these two kind of tricky things that we really want to talk a lot about today, which is political, public, and policy hostility to migrants, any asylum seekers, people of colour, and an increasing climate on online and offline hate, challenge, attacks, protests, polarisation across the UK. Whether it's on the street corner, whether it's a flag on a lamppost, whether it's a radio phone in, whether it's just interactions that people are having on the bus, it does seem we are living in many more challenging times and for everybody. And then we see some really extreme. Our colleagues in Northern Ireland, Homeless Connect, were talking about they're helping about 500 families who were forced to move the other night after naked riots and what could be called maybe pogroms. So there's some real challenges that we know that people are facing, and that affects those that we work with. It affects the communities that we're in. It affects us as individuals, and there aren't any easy answers. And that's some of what we want to explore today, airing the issues, but also hopefully giving some hope and offering some solutions and pointers. So that's the context that we're in. The good, we must remember that. The bad, must do better. The ugly, we really want to seek to tackle and challenge those. Okay, so just a couple of quotes. So I said we do our frontline worker survey. These are just a couple of quotes. We're analysing it at the moment. Thank you if you're on the call and you fed in. This is just some of the early quotes from this year's survey, highlighting some of the things that we talked about. This issue about a lack of availability of social housing, the issue about real challenges in working with refugees, that frontline workers feel undervalued, underappreciated, underpaid. But last quote, people still really enjoy, as you said this in your Menti comments, still really enjoy working in this sector, even though it's becoming more and more challenging. And because it's more and more challenging, it's more important than ever. So we are now going to move on to our one more set of questions before we go into the discussion. So if you go back onto Menti, 8378 2855. 837, I feel like I'm on a local radio phone in. 8378 2855. And we've got some quick fire questions before we open up into our panel. So next slide, Tom. So, how does it feel for you in that context, which I've talked about, working in homelessness right now? One word. Okay, these are the words we were kind of expecting, but it's always a bit stark to see it set out like that. Okay, frustrating, challenging, overwhelming, exhausting, demoralizing. Right, next slide. One thing that would make you feel more supported or valued in your role. Training, funding, supervision, support, housing. Quite a lot of funding. Ah, I really like this. Knowing there's a system that works with me, not against me. Recognition. Thank you. More supportive political climate. Better pay. Outcomes. Longer term contracts. Supervision. Housing. Being heard. Joining up. More community support. Chances to progress. Funding, 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 funding. Cake. Everyone needs a bit of cake. Higher pay. More housing. Realistic government policy. Better staffing. Okay. Supporting people uplift, local authority engaging, more collaboration, more support for PRS options, more funding, a senior team that supports. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So, in face of all those challenges, give us a positive thing that helps you, the people you serve, the clients, your team you're working with, your colleagues. The outcomes that you achieve, the work you do, work-life balance, people. This reflects something that you said right at the start about what you like most about your job, the people you're with, the people you work with, the managers you have, but ultimately the people you're helping. That's why you get out of bed every morning. Plus, some good things there about kind of where you've got environments with flexible working, work-life balance, autonomy, the kind of conditions in which you're being in a local charity, resilience, flexibility. Okay, great. Last question. One thing you want to say to your local policymaker or the Prime Minister, whoever they may be, uh, what do you want to put on Andy Burnham's to-do list? You want to say to him, you've got no idea. Sort out LHA, I said that earlier, more funding, more homes, sort out services, wake up, get real, stop demonizing, build affordable housing, sort it out, rent control, more options, great investment, better funding, come work with people for a week, get on the front line, put the money in the right places, more mental health support, have more trust, consistent funding, build more housing, listen to the real people, fund education provision, commit to housing, stop trying to out-reform reform. Really interesting point there. Increase LHA. So lots about rents, about LHA support, about services, about building more houses. Okay, brilliant. Thank you all for all your interaction so far. Those points are a perfect segue to introduce our speakers. So for this first panel of the day, well, we've got four excellent speakers. We've got Katie Dalton giving us a Wales perspective from Cymorth, Cymru. We've got Tom Neumark from Porchlight, who's going to give us a perspective of what it's like in working at a local level with our different local councils at the moment. We've got Bridget Young from the No Accommodation Network and Suzanne Fitzpatrick from Heriot-Watt University. And we're covering across the UK and different perspectives. And I've asked them to do some introductory thoughts, and then we're going to have a discussion between them and bringing in Q&A from yourselves too. First question I've asked them to address is what do they think the key issues are facing the homelessness sector and the workforce in terms of the current political and social environment and how they are responding. And Katie is always across the scene in Wales, but in Wales had massive. They've jumped the gun in terms of Westminster. They've already got a new First Minister, and they've already had political change as of about 3 or 4 weeks. And so Katie. And as tomorrow is 10 years from the Brexit referendum, which was huge for Wales, and ever since then, massive change has been happening. So, Katie, take it away. Give us your thoughts, please. Thank you.
Bore da pawb. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me here today. It's always a pleasure to join the Frontline Network events and talk to you all who do such incredibly important work. So yeah, as Duncan said, we've had some pretty seismic change in Wales after 27 years of Labour-led governments. We've had the first change ever. The Labour Party lost an election in Wales for the first time in 100 years. So you can imagine how significant that has been. Plaid Cymru are the new party of government. They didn't win a majority. We've got a new proportional system in Wales, which would make it very difficult for any one party to win a majority. But Plaid Cymru got the highest number of votes, and they've decided to form a minority government. The second biggest party is Reform UK, who, aside from a couple of defections from the Conservative Party last time, had not previously won seats in the Senedd, but they've got a significant number at 34. The Labour Party have dropped from holding 30 out of 60 seats in the Senedd to having only 9 out of 96. So a really significant drop off for the Labour Party in Wales. So, you know, one of the things that we're facing at the moment is just a major change in government and lots of unknowns. While Plaid have been in coalition governments or worked as partners in passing budgets and things like that, they've spent the vast majority of the last 27 years in opposition. So we have no idea really how they plan to operate as a government. We know them very well. We've worked with them, including the new housing minister for many years. We know that they're interested in social justice, that they're passionate about homelessness and about other social issues. So we think there'll be a lot to agree on. But, you know, running a government is very different to shouting from the opposition benches. So we are waiting with anticipation what that will start to look like. As with, you know, other areas of the UK, there are some shared challenges on the to-do list of the new government. Social house building is a major one. Plaid Cymru have set the target of building at least 20,000 new social homes over the next 4 years, a similar target to the last term, which was a stretch for the Welsh Labour government to meet. So something that will be challenging for them, but obviously something that, as we saw from the responses to the Menti poll, something that's really important to frontline workers. We've also, as Duncan said, got the Homelessness and Social Housing Allocation Wales Act, which got turned into an act on the 1st of April this year. The new minister has got a major task ahead of her to implement the changes brought in by the act, both changes in local government in terms of housing and how local councils respond to homelessness, but also bringing in some new duties on a range of other public services. So lots to do and lots on her desk going forward. We obviously don't know what a budget would look like under a Plaid Cymru government. Again, they've always been a strong supporter of the housing support grant and homelessness funding in Wales from the opposition benches. But what will that really look like from a new government perspective? And like many of you across the UK, we've been working hard to put workforce on the agenda over the last few years. I was part of a workforce task and finish group that reported just before the end of the last Senedd term. That report landed on the minister's desk desk in her last few months in office, and we're keen that the new minister takes that up and sets out a journey towards improving pay, improving support for staff, and improving recognition. But more broadly, the changes in the Senedd are really affecting how organisations operate within this space. They're affecting the sorts of questions that get asked within the Senedd. We have 70% new members of the Senedd, which is extraordinary. There's usually been a lot of continuity of members of the Senedd, with only a few changing each time. And what that has meant in the past is we know the people who are going to stand up for homelessness, stand up for support services, be there at every budget debate to raise the housing support grant. But having, looking at 70% of new members of the Senedd, I think it's safe to assume that the vast majority of those will have very little idea around the realities of homelessness, around the realities of the sector, of what it's like to work in services. So we've got a big task ahead of us just to inform and educate people and get them up to a baseline understanding of this. We've seen, lots of unknowns come through from reform. So whereas Plaid Cymru have got a lot of new members of the Senedd, a number of those are familiar to people like me. They've worked within charity sectors, they've worked within politics before. But for Reform, who, as I say, have got 34 seats, we don't know a lot about most of those because they haven't been on the radar before. So trying to understand what motivates them, who might be the members of the Senedd that we want to work with and expend time and effort on because they have an interest in homelessness, or they're the sort of people who will be willing to scrutinise the government effectively. A lot of that is really unknown, so it's really challenging. And I think, as you would expect, what we've seen in the first few weeks of the Senedd term is a huge increase in questions on immigration, whether that's focused on questions around asylum seekers and refugees and HMOs, whether that's criticism of the Welsh Government's Nation of Sanctuary policy, which helps people to integrate within Wales. Last week at First Minister's Questions, 3 out of the 11 questions asked were on immigration. So the nature of debate has changed within the Senedd. Issues that previously would not have had that amount of airtime are now kind of dominating the agenda in some cases. It's something that we need to anticipate, be prepared for, make sure that we're providing people with the right facts around these sorts of things and trying to quash some of those myths that are going around. And that has included for us conversations with journalists who've rang us to fact check some of the statements that have been made by members of the Senedd, both inside the chamber and outside the chamber. So I feel like for a lot of our organisations, that will be one of the challenges going forward, is trying to make sure that we provide that factual information, both for members of the Senedd, but also for journalists who are trying to report as accurately as possible on some of the statements that are being said in the Senedd. In terms of what we're doing to try and deal with the huge number of members of the Senedd and the changing government, we've created a congratulations pack for members of the Senedd that will be going out with some information about us, a copy of our manifesto that we developed with frontline workers before the election, and a mug with our campaign slogan around the right to a safe home and support to thriving communities. And we hope that that will provide a daily reminder as they're having their cup of tea of the importance of homelessness and encourage them to raise those issues within the Senedd. We'll be providing a number of briefings. We're also putting together a member compendium, which will almost be a bit of a yellow pages for our member organisations, which will tell members of the Senedd who's operated in their local constituency, how to get in touch with them, what sort of services they provide, and some key messages as well about the priorities from those organisations. We're also putting together information for our member organisations about how to engage with this new group of members of the Senedd. We're doing some research on their backgrounds. As I said before, we know a lot about a bunch of them and very little about others. So we want to help our members to have those conversations and engage. And we're also planning a frontline worker specific briefing for members. And we're hoping to organise some online meetups between frontline workers and new members of the Senedd to really share with them the realities of the job that you're undertaking on a daily basis. So to kind of wrap up, really, the two challenges for us are the massive change in government and members of the Senedd. How do we make sure that they're well informed and educated and focusing on the right things? And then the other side is the slight change in focus given reform coming into the Senedd, and how do we, manage those issues around misinformation and tackling those myths. So we're very early on, but that's a bit of a summary of where we are now in terms of the new Senedd and Welsh Government.
Great. Thanks, Katie. Really helpful. And we'll pick up some of those issues hopefully in the discussion. So now I want to come to Tom, Tom Neumark is Chief Exec of Porchlight. We often talk about the North-South divide in England, but forget sometimes pockets of really quite serious deprivation that there are in the South, and that Kent isn't all the leafy garden of England, but includes Medway towns and others that have some real challenges of deprivation. But also Kent's been run by Reform for over a year now, and so wants to get Tom's perspective on what it's like operating on the ground in an area like Kent as he does. So over to you, Tom. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure to speak with you today. And some of what I was going to say has already been covered, so I won't go into the whole this whole aspect of people being new, because I think that's a very, very relevant factor that I think probably all of the panel will explore. As Duncan mentioned, Porchlight's a charity. We're a homelessness and mental health charity, and we cover Kent. We're quite large as a homelessness charities go. We've got about 170 staff doing mental health in the community, outreach, supported housing, tenancy sustainment. I was going to start with a couple of stories about clients before talking a bit about the context. So I'll give you two examples. One is I was buddying along, probably to their annoyance, with an outreach team working in Dover. And we approached a guy who was sleeping rough under a bridge to see if we could offer him any support. He didn't want to talk to us. He didn't have a tent. He didn't have any possessions. He was sleeping rough. We gave him a bottle of water. We gave him a sleeping bag. I said to the team afterwards, why does he not want to talk to us? We've got a lanyard, she said. He won't talk to anyone with a lanyard. He knows the system is not on his side and that there are very few options for people who have no recourse to public funds anyway. I think a stark illustration of those points Duncan was making about different policies interacting with each other. We've got a stated policy where the government wants to end homelessness, and then also an environment where people who don't have certain rights simply aren't going to approach support and don't have that many options either. I'll tell you a second story. We had a really, really great Christmas party. Thank you to Kent County Cricket Club for hosting us. And we had a big do and presents and meals. And I was talking to a guy there. How's it going? Not great, he says. He's been banned from YouTube. How come, I say? He says, well, he's been talking to this guy online. The guy offered to pay for him to take the train up last year. There was a big protest in London all about these flags. He was going along to have a good time. He was trying to build up his YouTube channel, and he was caught saying things about the Prime Minister and about calling for the violent overthrow of our government. I said, did you say the guy paid for you to take the train? He said, oh, yeah, he's really looking out for me. He seems like a really solid guy. This client I was talking to, he's had a long experience of sleeping rough and is currently in one of our high support accommodations. He is incredibly vulnerable to radicalization. Some of the situation that we're operating in, and probably all of you will have similar stories to that. The politics in Kent is confusing. The county council is controlled by Reform. One of the main opposition voices to Reform is Restore, who are a kind of similar-ish political space. We have a number of districts. Some of them are controlled by Labour, some of them are controlled by Liberals, some of them have no overall control. We have an announcement that in 2 years or so, there's going to be reform of local government, where there's going to be some kind of new merging together and changing of the boundaries. And we don't know exactly how that's all going to shake out. And what it means is we not only have new politicians, but we have politicians who don't necessarily think they'll be around for that long. and certainly won't be running councils that will be around for that long. And so their appetite for undertaking radical transformation to, for example, shift support towards prevention and reduce the number of people long-term sleeping rough is minimal, as they are focused on what can they do for the next 2 years and what kind of legacy are they going to lead. I would say, I'm aware we've got a whole panel, I don't want to go on forever, but one of the things we've been trying to do a lot of is introduce our clients and ex-clients to these politicians and policymakers. Lots of the policymakers are probably going to be around some form or another with the reorganisation, even if there'll be change in politicians. I think it's great for policymakers and politicians to hear from people who work for charities, but there is a tendency, I think, particularly with newer politicians, including reform politicians, to have an attitude of the old famous phrase, you would say that, wouldn't you? But I think hearing the reality of speaking to people who've been through the system, what works, what doesn't work, the frustrations, can really have a very strong impact on politicians, many of whom might not know anything about homelessness, might not know anything about how you run the county hall, but they are people who are often moved by individuals in front of them. Now, it's easier said than done supporting clients to be in a position where they feel comfortable talking about their experiences, comfortable talking with politicians. And it's extensive work that we have to do, but we think it's an important piece for us to be doing, given this challenging political and social environment that we're operating in. So hopefully that's enough to get a few thoughts going and give you a bit of a flavour of what's happening in Fent.
Brilliant, Tom. That was really helpful. And particularly those two vignettes you started with, those two stories, NRPF and migration rules play out on real people, but it's also real people who we're seeing expressing views or are taking part in actions, either through choice or through radicalization, and they are in our services or sometimes in our workforces or sometimes our neighbours, and so it's not a distant thing that's happening just online. It's playing out in real life. So thank you for those two stories. I'm really apt now bringing Bridget from NACOM to tell us the perspective on the double challenging front line of the homelessness and the refugee and migration sectors. Thanks, Bridget.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks a lot for inviting us here. For those that don't know NACOM, we are a UK-wide network of around 140 charities supporting people facing homelessness and destitution in the asylum and immigration system, some of whom are online as well, which is lovely to see you. And I must say, so I'm just back today from a big chunk of time off. So I'm both a bit spacey and a bit giddy. But when the Mentimeter came up of like how you were all feeling, my heart like just really went out to everyone. And I just really wanted to give everyone a hug. I mean, that's not going to happen because, we're virtual and there are professional boundaries. And also my common refrain to my family at the moment is, I love you, but don't touch me. It's too hot. So for all those reasons, but it just was a real like visceral reaction to, gosh, you're amazing people and it's so hard and thank you. So, I just wanted to sort of start with that and that real sense of, like so many of you said, and this is an absolute experience of the NACOM network. We're a small but mighty network, but the people in it, the people who work and volunteer and who we work alongside are the thing that kind of motivate me and give me hope. And, that always that thing where like you think, the bad won't win out is because I know I spend so much time with such incredible people and including yourselves. And I just, really wanted to sort of start with that. So in terms of the issues that I think are facing the homelessness sector and workforce in terms of the current political and social environment, I think there's sort of 4 key things. One is the larger strategic issues around social justice that are kind of common across homelessness and other areas of social justice. The need for more and better affordable housing, the need for work or benefits to actually pay for people to live, access to support for health and well-being, tackling isolation. These are massive challenges, but they also provide really fertile ground for some of the division and the misinformation that we've been seeing. In terms of wider sector, you'll know this, like funding instability, it came up in some of the Mentimeter stuff. It's really, we think of all the things that you're trying to do, both, outreach, practical support and advice, bigger strategic stuff. It's really tough to do that in this environment of sort of stretched funding and insecurity about funding. For the NACOM network, and has been touched on already today, the rise of far-right populism and violence and the othering of migrants and people of colour is a huge issue. It has real-world consequences, which I know you know of, but is also a distraction and a scapegoating of those big systemic changes that we need to tackle. So the focus, what Katie was saying, how many of the questions were on immigration. It's right that people can talk about immigration, but unfortunately we can never really talk about it because it's just used as sort of it feels like it's used as a distraction or a scapegoat to rather than tackling some of the big things we need to sort out. And then kind of complexity and chipping away of rights. We've talked a bit about the constant churn in government. How do you build those national relationships? It takes a lot of time. I always have sympathy with policy and external affairs colleagues when there's a new minister, because so much time and effort gets put into trying to build relationships, like Katie was saying, upskill people in terms of letting them know what the reality is of the challenges, and it's just like sometimes you're starting that work again and again. And then certainly in the asylum, the migration sector, I joined NACOM 5 years ago, and I've lost count of how many bits of legislation that there have been, which again have real world consequences because it changes the way local authorities can act, it changes what funding is allocated, and it creates a lot of uncertainty about what can and can't happen. So those are some of the sort of, I think real world key issues that are facing the sector, and really build on what Katie and Tom were saying. What I would add as well, and it really picks up on the what you were all saying in the Mentimeter, is what all of it does is it makes the challenge of ending homelessness harder. It really affects motivation and mental health of staff, of volunteers, of people facing homelessness. I think that's been one of the biggest changes I've sort of seen, is that so often, the NACOM network, incredible people, but I don't know how they keep going sometimes. I genuinely don't, and that's not a space we should be in. But all this uncertainty and change and division, and that's what it's going to lead to. In terms of how we're responding, because we do always, no matter how bad things are, we crack on and we keep on trying. We're trying to broaden how we work with NACOM members, recognizing that we can't just narrowly focus on homelessness solutions. So we also need to focus on organizational resilience, safety, well-being, combating harmful myths. A lot of the time that's in partnership. We're relatively small charities and we can't do everything ourselves. We continue to advocate nationally. So some of the work that Duncan mentioned at the beginning around the National Plan to End Homelessness, but really feel that local is the way to go. It feels like it's where barriers can be broken down and knowledge and compassion can be formed. And for us at NACOM, that's, the strength of the NACOM network are these 140 incredible local charities. So that's our kind of focus, is both broadening and broadening the type of support, but also going local and keeping people focused. I think that's NACOM's a very relational network, and that having people at the center of everything we do is got to be a way forward, because then you're also kind of modeling the way you want to see the world.
Wow, thanks, Bridget. That was amazing. If you come out with all of that on your first day back from a break, in a week's time, you're going to be off the scale with great comments. You said so much that was really good, but the key thing you said was bad. The bad won't win out. So I think that's the really important thing to hold on to. So thank you so much. Anyone's got any questions they want to ask the panel, do put them in the Q&A function. If you can't find it, there's 3 dots at the bottom of your screen to click on that. And then delighted to ask Suzanne Fitzpatrick of Heriot-Watt University to add her thoughts. Suzanne, over to you.
Thanks very much, Duncan, and it's been great to hear what my colleagues have had to say this morning, already getting that flavour of how things are in different parts of the the country. I think in the introduction, Duncan's already mentioned I'm an academic. I work at Heriot University, so I wouldn't want to claim to be as close to the front line as many people on this call, and also the colleagues we've just heard from. So it's more, I suppose, personal reflections from my position being working and living in Scotland, and particularly living in Glasgow, about how things seem to be here, and sort of picking up some contrasts and continuities from what we've heard from elsewhere. I mean, Duncan, when you and I spoke about this last week, you were saying that there is this sense that things are a bit less toxic in Scotland than perhaps elsewhere in the UK, and I think that's probably right. I mean, this is a relative point. Things are certainly getting worse, but they're probably not quite as toxic. And we have had the kind of raising of the colours, the flags, and so on, particularly in poorer parts of Scotland. And we have seen protests outside asylum accommodation in some parts of Scotland. But I think tellingly, and I want to talk mostly about Glasgow, because it's the most important area for these issues. The fire alarm in my house has just gone off as I am trying to speak. Can you hear this? No.
We can't hear it, but do you need to leave?
No, it's I've got somebody in doing work on my children.
Okay.
He's decided right now to test our smoke.
We can't hear anything. We just don't want you to stay and burn. But if you can stay, no. Please, let's go for it.
Apologies, it's a smoke alarm. He's tested it. It's gone. Sorry about that. But yes, in different parts of the UK, there have been, as we know, really horrendous anti-asylum protests outside of asylum accommodations, and we have had some of that in Scotland. For sure, particularly in the smaller parts of the smaller towns. Sorry, my dog is now terrified of the noise and is in bothering me. So terrible. But what we have is mostly escaped this. In Glasgow, we did, in the light of the riots in Belfast, see some horrible sights a couple of weeks ago of sort of marauding men in the city centre. But what we haven't had is those consistent protests outside asylum accommodation that we've seen in smaller places like Falkirk and Erskine, actually, which is a housing estate outside Glasgow, where I'm from, my family still live, and other places like Perth, Dundee, and so on. So I've been asking people working in the sector and colleagues in the statutory sector as well, what explains this. And there's a number of factors, I think. And another point of context that's worth making is Glasgow has the largest number of asylum seekers anywhere in the UK. I mean, by a long way. It's about, the figures, I think, at the end of March of this year was there were 4,000 asylum seekers in Glasgow. The next nearest local authority is Birmingham with about half that number. So Glasgow has a massive concentration of people who are experiencing the asylum system, and yet by and large we have escaped the worst of what we've seen in other parts of the country. So I think it is interesting to reflect on why. I mean, one thing that some colleagues have told me is that Police Scotland have been on top of it. They've been monitoring what's going on in social media and so on, and have managed to get on top of any sort of potential issues outside of asylum accommodation in different parts of the city, perhaps more effectively than they've managed elsewhere in the country. There is a number of other factors which are kind of big city factors, which are different from elsewhere in Scotland. So you have a large student population, you have a large sort of liberal middle class who are much more progressive in their views and so on, and provide a counterweight to that kind of right-wing populism and anti-immigration settlement. We also have a large diaspora community in Glasgow now, and a large minority ethnic population. But 1 in 5 people in Glasgow are from a minority ethnic group, which is a very different profile from the rest of Scotland. But we also have another factor, which is perhaps a bit counterintuitive. We've got a tradition, as some people will know, in Scotland, or a very uncomfortable tradition of sectarian football and community relations. And in fact, this apparently has helped act as a bit of a counterweight. When you see those when you see those sort of marauding masked men in Glasgow city centre a few weeks ago, and responding to the Belfast riots and so on, they are from the loyalist Protestant Rangers supporting community. But on the other side, you have the Catholic Celtic kind of other side of the sectarian divide. And as I understand it, this has meant that within Glasgow, that's actually acted as part of the counterweight. You've got this perhaps unusual and surprising coalition of forces, really. Sort of, you've got minority ethnic groups, you've got kind of students and liberal white educated population, and you've also got people who support Celtic. Countering that far right influence. So when there have been these, and there have been some of these, rallies and so on, they've been heavily outnumbered by people from the progressive side of the political spectrum. But what you've also got is a different tone, I think, coming from the top of politics within Scotland as a whole. From the First Minister down, you have a much more positive rhetoric, excuse me, around immigration in general and around asylum in particular. We have a new Scots integration strategy from the Scottish Government. We have broadly progressive stances from across most of the political spectrum: SNP, Labour, Greens, Liberal Democrats. The Tories pretty much irrelevant, at least until recently. And generally on side actually on these issues as well. But we have also, of course, had Scottish parliamentary elections recently, and although the SNP came back to power, they are not, it's a minority government. Of course, we have proportional representation in Scotland too, but we have in the past had SNP majority governments, but it is a minority government. Reform did come joint second with Labour in those elections, and so have made their inroads into Scotland as well now, although they didn't win any constituencies, but they did win in the regional list, so they have 17 seats in Parliament and actually are deputy convener of the relevant Scottish parliamentary committee that deals with housing and homelessness. So that is a big challenge, I think, for a lot of us now in Scotland. But I wanted to end on a maybe a slightly more positive note about an initiative that hopefully some people on the call will have heard about, but it's a Scotland-only initiative, so perhaps many people haven't, and it's called Fairway Scotland. Now, this focuses on people with no recourse to public funds in Scotland, and it's a really interesting initiative. It operates in certain parts of Scotland, but it has the backing of the Scottish Government, who put some funding into it, as well as the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. It is mostly driven by voluntary sector colleagues, both from the homelessness and the refugee and migrant sectors, and it provides cash support, accommodation and advice and legal support, casework to people with no recourse to public funds in Scotland. And I think what's really important about it is it's rooted in a sort of policy position and a rhetoric coming from the top of Scottish politics, which is encapsulated in the strategy Ending Destitution Together. It's the only part of the UK which has a strategy where the key national government is saying that nobody should be destitute in Scotland, and that includes people with no recourse to public funds. And the National Homelessness Strategy, our action plan in Scotland, also explicitly includes people with no recourse to public funds. How that's going to change now with reform having this foothold in the Scottish Parliament and also being involved in one of the relevant committees is something that we're all obviously very concerned about. Thankfully, the progressive parties do still have the SNP are still in power. The progressive parties in combination are much more numerous and have much more power than reform, but it will start to change things. But I just wanted to finish by picking up a point I think that Bridget made as well, which comes through very much in the work around Fairway Scotland. I should say I'm not directly involved in it, but my colleagues are doing the evaluation on Fairway Scotland. And it's these sites of leverage that you have when national policy is as hostile and when the political environment is as hostile as it is to people of colour generally, migrants and people who are coming through the asylum system in particular. And then it's especially important to find those sites of leverage. And for us, it includes actually devolved levels of government. A lot of local authorities, to their credit in Scotland, have also spoken out against right-wing populism as well, and the impacts in their area. Obviously the relevant charity sector, and I think this bringing together the homelessness and the refugee and asylum charities has been particularly powerful, together with progressive philanthropic organisations. So things are not great in Scotland. They are getting worse for sure, but I do think there are particularly, and I think particularly the situation in Glasgow has some lessons that might be of interest to colleagues elsewhere in the UK.
Great. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Suzanne didn't say, but for those who don't know, Suzanne and her team do the Homelessness Monitor reports for each of the nations of the UK. She also leads on the destitution survey. So the best insight there is as to what's going on around homelessness in each of the nations, its causes and consequences, and sadly, the level of destitution we have. So do check out any of those if you ever want to know more. I've never really thought of football hooliganism as being an antidote to wider disorder, but taking the football theme, obviously, one of the interesting things that's sprung up is around the issue of flags. And in the World Cup, this is potentially a challenge because it is a time when we all put our flags out, but in many instances, we live in towns and cities where every lamppost has already got a flag already on it, and how that plays out. And I wanted to pick up on kind of rightly, everybody's talked about we still need to be seeking national change, whether that's on the things, as Bridget said, the big social justice issues, which we really should focus on, like housing, work and benefits, and policy around NRPF and immigration. But increasingly, we live in a world where things are playing out on every community, every street, every corner, and that is affecting how people's service feels, the environment there is. So just a little bit about kind of, maybe Tom, I'll come to you first and then come to Bridget. Anything that's playing out for you in terms of your services, your staff, your clients, about safety, about radicalization, about how it's feeling kind of being out there on the front line. Tom.
Yeah, if you want flags on lampposts, come to Kent. That's the place to see them, definitely. It's flagorama. I mean, I'd say a couple of things building on what I said earlier. One is, with the changes since Brexit and so on, we now have a huge number of seasonal workers in Kent. People often from Central Asia, for example, Kyrgyzstan and things, brought over on a 6-month visa. That's tied to a single employer. So if something goes wrong, or if they're being exploited or something, and they end up homeless, they're not coming over with money, they're normally coming over with debt, they're in a very precarious situation. Similarly, if you have unaccompanied minors who come over, who disappear when they're in the processing facilities and so on, they're in a very difficult situation. If you have victims of modern day slavery who are in Kent, either because of the industries there or because they're coming over, they're in a very precarious situation. And if they don't feel like services are for them, if they don't feel like that's a door that they can push on, that they'll have a warm greeting, there's absolutely no chance they're going to do it. It's not like these people know about the system. It's not like they have high trust in the system anyway. So ambient feelings of hostility only make it harder to support people who are at some of the highest risks of experiencing homelessness and exploitation. Also, if you're a charity that's trying to gather resources to reduce and end homelessness in a certain area, you are bombarded by hostility around that. And so that might be on the level of individual workers if they post things online, or as an organization if they post things online. We could say, it's hot today. Our outreach workers will be delivering cold water and fans. We're trying to set up cooling spaces. The first 5 responses will be something about immigration. Guaranteed. And this is a tricky environment to be gathering resources and effectively supporting people in. And for a charity such as Porchlight, and I'm sure lots of people on the call today work for a similar charity, we are essentially at the root of it, a community-based service delivery charity. The thing we know most about is supporting the individuals who are in front of us. So these questions about how do we change other people's minds, how do we shift debate and so on, they are ones we're good at, we're strong at. And so we have to try and join in with others and try and build that coalition really around that, because that's certainly not something we can do it ourselves. But Duncan, I recognise the picture you're painting. It's a tough environment.
Thank you, Tom. But that's why I think it's also really important, although you can't do that. Sometimes in airy rooms, people talk about new narratives, and it's like a new narrative ain't going to help you provide the support you need without being abused and get it to the person who's vulnerable and fearful. And so it's tying together that lofty ideas with the harsh realities on the ground. I'm going to come to you, Bridget. There's also a question in the chat here about managing the changes to the settlement route, which you might be able to say on something about Bridget as well. And just to say, not in the chat, in the Q&A, sorry, and say anyone else has got a question, we've got about 15 minutes left. Put it in the Q&A, please, and we'll come to it. So, Bridget.
Yeah, I'll just come to the first one first, because I'll probably, it's like getting my brain still into work here. I think Tom, really articulated it really well in terms of the impact, that sort of visceral, personal impact on people, working and volunteering and accessing services in this space, and particularly, migrants, people in the asylum and immigration sector, and colleagues who, are people of colour. I think, we can't underestimate sort of just the level of constant vigilance that people need, and that it's online and in person. That I can't begin to understand. I know that, but it's constant and it's present. And I know it's something in terms of the NACOM network that needs to be, it needs to be how you think about how you work with people and work alongside people now. Just their kind of safety, their mental health, their experience of entering a building and exiting a building, and, things like that. In terms of for, organizations in the NACOM network, and, really picking up on what Tom said, there's a big thing, some practical things around, I remember after the riots in summer 2024, organizations suddenly had to add, potential emergency boarding, boarding up their buildings in a budget line that they'd never had before, just things like that. We're looking at insurance, insurance policies, to make sure it covered the things that they were being subjected to, looking at additional funding to provide things like transport for people who did not feel and were not safe to kind of walk home or walk back to where they were staying. So that's sort of, it's just adding that like real layer of sort of fear and concern and mistrust, and, which is just now, it's got to be part of how organizations just work, unfortunately. On the flip side of that, and that's, tapping into the thing about going local, you think about whenever there's something awful happens, the community response afterwards. Like, again, I think of the riots in the summer a couple of years ago, where there was, people in the community coming to help, like, clean up and sweep up the streets and, provide sort of drinks and biscuits, and that, like, immediate community response. There's something about how we need to focus in, do more, highlight more of that, because that is out there. So, the Million Acts of Hope that recently happened, absolutely love that. There's a fantastic organization called Who Is Your Neighbor that does a lot about, like, having conversations. Another organization, Duncan, you'll know, MAF from Camarados, that's really about, like, just tapping into that, like, we are human, we are together. It doesn't mean everyone loves each other and gets on and that there's not challenges, but actually you, who I'm looking at opposite me, is not the cause of everything going wrong in my life. And there's something about needing to tap into more of that. But again, and Duncan, you and Tom were both saying this, how do we do that alongside the day job of outreach work or research or policy or, the things that we are doing now? It's recognizing we need to do more. but sort of not stretch ourselves in ways that we can't cope with. I don't have an answer on the own settlement. I will after a week back at work.
Thank you. We'll try and come back to you, Yasin. And just on the unsettlement point, I mean, one of the things that politicians have long talked about is that people coming here should play by our rules. And the idea that people coming here who are playing by our rules, quote unquote, and bringing their families up here are now going to find it ever harder to settle and integrate is like an Orwellian paradox off the scale. But sadly, that is kind of where we're at. Katie, you were nodding on furiously to everything everybody said. So I just wondered if you wanted to kind of come in on anything that Tom, Bridget had said or on the topic generally.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And yeah, I was nodding vigorously along because, in complete agreement with that. I think it's really interesting in Wales. It's slightly different in terms of that relationship with flags. And I'm sure, Suzanne, there are some similarities with Scotland and some differences in terms of that sectarian stuff. But in Wales, I think, the big element of kind of Welsh nationalism and those who choose to vote for Plaid Cymru and display Welsh flags is much more around the kind of civic nationalism rather than stuff that's linked to racism or xenophobia. Of course, there are people, we've seen how the elections worked out in Wales who have, deep concerns about immigration. Whether those are based in fact and reality or not is another discussion. So I'm not at all pretending that there are lots of communities who are concerned about immigration, and I would say that probably correlates a lot with the communities who've been let down since deindustrialization, who don't have the kind of economic job opportunities that they perceive others to have, and probably don't have communities that are flooded with immigrants, but actually are looking to blame that. And I think we've all got a job to do in terms of communicating the structural factors that cause homelessness and other inequalities, to take it away from that kind of blame on a person or a group of people. And I think there's lots that we as national organisations can do in response to that. So in terms of flags, there were some concerns raised by members about, asked to put flags up, but actually the culture here around Welsh flags is very different to the culture around England flags. So it feels a little bit different here compared to England. But as I said before, that's absolutely not to say that we've got a problem with misinformation and concerns about immigration that are not linked to reality. And I think, for service providers out there, it's about trying to provide the resources and support. And I think that frontline workers are in a really, really challenging position, and particularly those that work with groups who are the most marginalised and therefore, as Tom explained earlier, are kind of the targets for exploitation, for radicalisation and all of that. And we know that within services, people express views that I think the charities supporting them wouldn't align their values with. But how do you manage that when that person is vulnerable? There is a real power imbalance there in terms of that relationship. How do you protect staff, but at the same time continue to support someone who's expressing those views? And we all know where those views are probably linked to, and that's often trauma and inequality. So, I think the big task ahead is yes, for organisations like ours to do all we can on a policy level, but for me, there's a big question: how do we support frontline workers to deal with the practical and daily realities of dealing with this within communities?
Thanks, Katie. That's really powerful. I think that point about how I think you both all talked about, we've got these twin challenges of how we humanize individuals so they're not, and talk about the structural factors that are holding them back to win kind of hearts and minds, but also recognize it's messy. I think there was a sort of view a kind of few years back after George Floyd that things were very clear and you could draw clear lines, and actually recognizing that people are saying things in discussions that people may not agree with, but they're not. But we need to engage and listen and understand where it's coming from, not just stand and get a placard. And the protests when they've happened, you can't imagine being a charity and you can't actually talk about your work because you've got to hide for safety. That kind of big change that we've got. But there've been protests that have happened in towns where you've looked at one side where people are saying shut this hotel down, and you've looked at the other side saying go away, you're all racist, and the majority person that is lost in the middle saying actually and we've got that job to reach out and engage, not just condemn and shut down. I want to move. We've got. It's always important. We've done quite a lot this session, but it's always important to kind of finish on some positives. But before that, I just wanted to, Suzanne, does anything you wanted to kind of add to reflect on what you'd heard from Bridget, Katie, or Tom?
Yeah, I suppose picking up one of Katie's points about when people who are using services express those views, I do think that's one of the most challenging. I mean, it's ever been thus. I've often thought it was quite, from a researcher's point of view, a bit naive. Some of the overwhelming emphasis on or the sometimes naive emphasis on lived experiences, the be all and end all of kind of evidence on homelessness, because you would take you down quite a regressive path a lot of the time if you really took that literally. So I think it's really, there is a really subtle, there's a very kind of skilled task there for frontline workers, and actually also for researchers as well, which is something that we're very conscious of. On the flags thing, I think it is a bit similar in Scotland, Katie. I mean, there's a lot of, the Scotland flag doesn't necessarily mean what the kind of, it's definitely not Kent. There are not kind of Union Jacks and saltires all over Scotland which are encapsulating that kind of racist, aggressive, negative, intimidating kind of dynamic. But it is in pockets, and it's really shocking when you see it, and they are using the saltire for those purposes, but it is in small pockets. It's definitely not the mainstream. But one thing, just where I live in the south side of Glasgow, is I went down to the kind of main shopping area one day, and the place was awash with flags, and I got a real fright to begin with. But it turned out to be, it was a combination of the Gaza flag and the saltire, and those vastly outnumbered the other ones, and that's the dynamic that there has been whenever there's been these protests in Glasgow, is the anti kind of racist protests have vastly outnumbered. And so there's a sense in which, and I do take your point, Duncan, about we've got to understand, but actually we do have to do some condemning as well. I mean, there's a lot of these protests in the smaller parts of Scotland. We know that there have been sort of neo-Nazis from all over the UK have been bussed in to those, and exploiting, as Tom and others have said, exploiting vulnerable people, whether they are other people who are homeless with complex needs, or they're local people who are living in deprivation and dire inequality. But I do think that is partly what makes it challenging, is it's a combination of those things about supporting people, but also coming down really hard where we need to, ensuring these kinds of people stay as far away from power as possible.
Definitely. The toolbox needs to be very sophisticated to condemn, to keep tackling the structural issues, to win hearts and minds, and to supporting people on the front line. Right. I'm going to come to each of you for a final thought, which is something positive that either you're doing or that you're aware of in either an organization or around kind of showing solidarity. Because one of these questions is, if we're all turning up on our own, we won't get very far. If we all turn up together, we've got much more chance. So, a kind of final thought. I'm going to go to Katie, Bridget, Suzanne, and then I want Tom as the most frontline here to have the last word. Okay, Katie.
Yeah, I've put a link in the chat to a shared statement from Homes for All Cymru, which is a coalition of the sector housing organisations operating in Wales. And we continue to have discussions about the challenges in relation to this. We want to show a sign of strength and solidarity together wherever possible. We've had certain organisations like the Welsh Refugee Council get targeted by Elon Musk and have all sorts of threats. So there's been a real move to stand together in solidarity. But also shout out to Tai Pawb, who operate in Wales, who provide a space for organisations and workers in Wales to come together and talk specifically about the challenges around this issue. And that's been a really important space for lots of people.
Great. Bridget.
Yeah, so just a few things from me on what I've seen is, I think, mainstream charity, so not just in homelessness or the migration sector, coming together to spearhead the Million Acts of Hope. I mentioned it already. I think something along those lines has been amazing, because that's just about like who we are, not necessarily just about the issues. We are on the advisory group for the City of Sanctuary Local Authority stream, and that's been really fantastic because it's a space to talk about really like practical solutions that City of Sanctuary, lead on, that kind of, bust myths, provide evidence, provide suggestions for what can make things better locally. I think mainstream charities having some real expertise on migration. I see that Anna Yasin from Glassdoor is on here, and Anna's sort of knowledge and experience, particularly around migrant homelessness and particularly around, migrant women's experience of homelessness, has been such a fantastic asset to that charity, but also to the sector. So having kind of investing in that sort of knowledge. And then just a quick shout out to something like, so we published a few years ago a housing association toolkit where we worked with NACOM members and housing associations to show different ways that you can create like practical partnerships that often are just, start small, one house, one property, one bit of partnership, but then it grows into that wider kind of knowledge and solidarity and support sort of locally. And I think more things like that actually, make practical change, but have that wider sort of solidarity and support. And I have to give a shout out to one of NACOM's resources.
Thanks, Bridget. And as you were speaking, someone was putting in the How to Talk About Homes and Immigration in the chat guide that RF led. So great. Thank you, Bridget. Suzanne?
Well, I've already mentioned the Fair Way Scotland initiative, which is focused on people with no recourse to public funds. But I think what's really powerful about that isn't just the material support that it gives people, which is obviously really important, but the way it draws together all of those sites of leverage, those progressive sites of leverage. So the national government, the umbrella body for local authorities in Scotland, a range of progressive philanthropic organisations, a number of local authorities, but also crucially charities in both the homelessness and the refugee migration sector as well, all working together and actually managing to reach out, to politicians across most of the political spectrum. Reform to one side, even sort of conservative members of the Scottish Parliament saying positive things about the work that is being done there. So I think this standing together against destitution and homelessness is something that we're obviously having to increasingly do, and I do think that there are models where people are coming together across different sectoral divides to do that. But I do take on the point Bridget just made as well about what would be even more powerful is bringing on board those mainstream advice and other poverty charities and so on too, and having them increasingly involved, I think would be a further step forward.
That's very helpful. Standing together as broad as we can has to be the way forward. Tom?
Well, I wanted to say thank you very much for having me today, and what a fantastic conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot also about lots of different contexts where I've not worked. It's lovely to hear the richness. I was going to say something we're trying to do that we're kind of proud of, and I was also going to end, if I could be cheeky, Duncan, with one of the questions I was thinking about, which is like, so if I had my one wish, what would it be? And so one of the things we've been doing is we've been working, as I said, we're not a campaigning organisation. We're an organisation that delivers services. So we work with others when there's things like campaigns and policy asks. And we've been working with a few organisations, including English Rural, on this question of rural homelessness. What are effective responses to rural homelessness? How can government support them? How can we all support them? It's interesting because it's not explicitly about immigration. Not all people who experience homelessness in rural settings are people of colour or are people who weren't born in England, but there's a big crossover. And it's interesting to see how using a slightly different badge can bring together a few more interests, including we had a meeting with Conservative members of Parliament who are very supportive of that. If I had one wish, it would be every new politician, when they're voted in, has to spend one day working in a high support hostel. And I think it would be a very eye-opening experience for them, as today has been for me. So thank you very much, Duncan.
Fantastic. Huge thanks, Tom. I love that idea of talking about issues from different angles coming into them. I also, whatever happens at national level, I was at an event yesterday with some people in the homelessness sector who've worked a lot with Andy Burnham over the years and said at least he does have a knowledge and understanding of homelessness that previous prime ministers may not have done. So that's good. But thank you so much to Suzanne, Katie, Bridget, Tom. Thank you to all of you for listening and engaging. I know that we could have talked a lot longer. We've got in the workshop sessions coming up, we've got one that's looking a bit more specifically with our colleague Bethan from Praxis and others talking about dealing with the increased threat. But we've also got other sessions. Do please come along. Go and make yourself a cup of tea. Been a bit of a heavy session, but thank you for all your input with the Menti at the beginning. And I will finish with the words of Bridget. The bad won't win out. And so therefore, if we all keep working locally, nationally, in solidarity, learning from each other, building networks, there's an incredible richness of what we're all doing, what you're all doing. And if we keep doing so, the bad won't win out. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day. Go and have that cup of tea. Thanks very much, everyone.